He wasn't just a ranger in the wild or the sword-wielding heir to Gondor's throne. Aragorn lived a life that legends envy, raised in secret, hunted by shadows, torn between love and duty, and crowned in the ashes of war. But behind the crown and blade lies a journey more epic than any song the BS ever sang. What if I told you the future king was once a hunted orphan, and that the fate of Middle-earth depended not on strength, but on a choice he made in silence? By the way, before we dive in, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? And what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far the fellowship of Middle-earth really stretches. The story of Aragorn begins not with triumph, but with loss. Long before the fellowship, before the battles of Helm's Deep or the crowning, in Gondor, there was a broken kingdom in the north and a child born into danger. Arathorn II, chieftain of the Dúnedain, and heir to Isildur's fading bloodline, lived in a world of constant threat. The kingdom of Arnor had long since crumbled, split, and shattered by war and time. Its people, rangers, and nomads roamed the wilderness, hunted by orcs, and shadowed by the ever-growing darkness in the east. But even in the ruins of a once great realm, hope endured. Arathorne tu marit Gilan woman of strength and quiet wisdom, and from that union, in the year 2931 of the Third Age, a son was born, Aragorn the last of the line of kings, a boy who carried the weight of ages in his veins, yet he would barely know his father. When Aragorn was just 2 years old, Arathorn led a band of rangers to hunt orcs in the wilds of Ariador. It was a mission born of duty, and it would be his last. A stray orc arrow pierced his eye, and the chieftain fell, leaving his young son fatherless, and his wife a grieving widow. Gilan, fearing for her child's safety, took him to the only place where the shadows could not yet reach, Riendell. There, in the hidden valley of the elves, Elrond received the boy. But he knew the boy danger. If Sauron learned that Isildur's line still lived, the child would be hunted without mercy. So Aragorn's name was concealed. He would be known only as Estel, which in Elvish means hope. Hope in the ashes of war. And so under starlight and silence, a king was raised in secret. No throne, no crown, only the legacy of a broken sword and the burden of a destiny that had waited over 3,000 years. The world would forget his name, but it was in that, forgetting that, Aragorn's legend began. He would rise, not through prophecy, but through quiet suffering. The last flame of Numa flickering in the dark, in the halls of Rivendell, hidden behind waterfalls and ancient trees. Aragorn lived a life unlike any child of men. He knew nothing of swords, crowns, or the burden that would one day break him or make him. To him, Eland was not a lord, but a father. The elves not guardians of an ancient world, but kind voices that echoed like song in the twilight. The forests were his playground, the stars his companions, and his name was Estelle. Pope Gilan, his mother, watched him with silent sorrow. She loved him dearly, but the weight of what he must become haunted her eyes. Though she never told him the truth, she knew her time with him as a child was fleeting. Eland had warned her his path will be hard. If he survives it, he will be alone more often than not. So she let him run barefoot through gardens of light, let him laugh among the elves, knowing each laugh was borrowed from fate. But Estelle was no ordinary boy. He was keen of mind, swift of foot, and quiet in spirit. The elves noted something ancient in his gaze, as though the wisdom of many lives had settled in his bones. He listened more than he spoke, and often wandered the libraries of Rivendell, lost among stories of heroes, wars, and kingdoms long fallen to dust. There was one story he always returned to, the tale of Isildur, the man who cut the ring from Sauron's hand, and then failed to destroy it. Estelle did not know that Ildur's blood ran through his veins, but something in the tale stirred him, both awe and unease. By his 10th year, the whispers among the elves grew. He learns too quickly, they said. He has the heart of a king. Eland watched, quietly, holding back the truth like a dam before a flood. Estelle, unaware, lived on with curiosity in his soul and quiet fire in his heart. But even in the safe halls of Rivendell, the world outside was changing. Dark shapes moved in distant woods. Whispers of Sauron's return began to spread, and the shadow that had once claimed his father would soon be reaching for the sun. The days of innocence were numbered. Soon Estelle would have to meet Aragorn. By the time Estelle reached his 20th year, he had grown into a man of quiet strength and restless soul. His eyes, grey like storm-washed skies, held questions he could no longer ignore. Elrond saw it. Gilon felt it. The time had come to unveil the truth. One evening, Elrond summoned him to a high chamber lit only by candle, light and memory. No guards, no ceremony, just the elf lord and the young man he had raised like a son. What followed would shatter the world. Estelle thought he knew. Elrond spoke gently, but his words fell like thunder. You are Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to Ild, the last of the Dunedain, the true king of Gondor and Arnor. The silence that followed was vast. Estelle, Aragorn, could barely breathe. A king him. The blood of Isildur coursed through his veins. The same Isildur who failed to destroy the ring. Then came more. Elrond handed him the ring of Barahir, a relic of ancient Numa once worn by kings. Then the shards of Narsil, the broken sword that had cut the ring from Sauron's hand. The blade was shattered just like the Prend kingdom it once ruled. With shaking hands, Aragorn took the hilt. Cold, heavy, and full of unspoken promises. You have not come to the end of your journey, Elrond said. You have only just begun. The weight of destiny crashed down upon him. When he left that chamber, he was not the same man. Estelle was gone. Aragorn had awakened. But not everyone welcomed this change. Gillan, his mother, watched him with both pride and pain. She had raised him for this moment. Yet, now that it had come, her heart trembled. He is too young, she whispered, too unready. He has no idea what it means to carry the hopes of the free peoples. But Elrond knew time was running short. Darkness was rising. The world needed more than hidden kings and forgotten swords. They needed hope, not in name, but in action. So Aragorn made a choice. He would leave Rivendell, abandon comfort, embrace exile. He would walk the wild paths of Middle-earth, not as a ruler, but as a servant, not to claim a crown, but to prove he deserved one. The world beyond Rivendell was vast, untamed, broken, and whispering with danger. But before Aragorn took his first step into exile, fate placed one more obstacle before him, one far more complicated than orcs, blades, or shadows. Her name was Arwen. She had returned from Lothlorien not long before, daughter of Eland, granddaughter of Galadriel, the even star of her people, immortal, radiant, untouched by time or sorrow. They met beneath the golden trees of Rivendell as the sun filtered through ancient branches. Aragorn, no longer Estelle, now stood in his full height, young, uncertain, with a fire in his spirit. And Arwen, she saw it. At first, she looked upon him as one might a curious flame, something wild and fleeting. But the more they spoke, the more that flame grew. He spoke to her, not as a subject to royalty, but as a man who knew how fragile life truly was. Every glance he gave her carried the clues for liver, weight of time he didn't have. Arwen, centuries older, saw something rare in him, mortality wrapped in courage, and slowly, against both tradition and reason, she began to care. They walked together through Rivendell's quiet groves, speaking of stars, old songs, and what lies beyond the sea. But love in Middle-earth never comes without price. When Elrond learned of their growing bond, his heart grew heavy. She is of the elder. You are of the race of men, he said to Aragorn. Her fate is bound to the undying lands. Yours to death. Aragorn said nothing, but deep within a war had begun. How could he ask her to forsake eternity for a mortal? Life of hardship and war, how could he? Not when every step away from her felt like tearing from his own soul. He made no promises to Arwen, not yet. But the seed was planted, and it would bloom over. Many long years in hope, in sorrow, and in waiting. Then at last Aragorn turned from the valley that raised him, with only a sword hilt, a heavy heart, and a future carved in shadow. He left Rivendell behind, and so began the long road of the Ranger, not as a prince, not as a hero, but as a man already at war, with the world, with his bloodline, and with his heart. The world did not welcome Aragorn. Beyond the safety of Rivendell, Middle-earth was cracking under the weight of growing darkness. The whispers of Sauron's return had become quiet certainties. Shadows gathered in Mirkwood. Orcs bred in, numbers unseen since the days of Mordor's fall. The free peoples were scattered, weary, and leaderless. Aragorn, now 20, walked into this chaos, with no army, no followers, only a broken lineage and a silent vow. He would not claim the throne by blood. He would earn it in exile, disguised Beneath cloak and hood, he took no titles. He became a wanderer, a huntsman, a ghost in the wild. To most, he was simply a man named Strider, worn, grim, and watchful. Few knew that the man sleeping in mud beneath the trees was the rightful king of Gondor, but that was how he wanted it. He traveled far across the windswept plains of Rohan, through the tangled woods of Mirkwood, down into the sun-scorched lands of Harat. In every corner of Middle-earth, Aragorn left a footprint, sometimes as a guide, sometimes as a soldier, always as a shadow. He learned the tongues of many lands, the customs of kings and peasants alike. He hunted beasts that should have been legends. He defended villages that would never know his name. And in every quiet act, in every battle survived, he carved away the uncertainty within him. This was no prince on a quest. This was a man forging himself in fire. Yet was never truly alone. The Dunedain, the rangers of the north, men of his own bloodline, still roamed the wild. They watched, waited, and guarded the land in dark. Secret, slowly, quietly, Aragorn became their leader, not by declaration, but by action. Even in obscurity, his legend began to form. Children in Bree whispered about the tall man with the sharp eyes. Orcs learned to fear the ranger with the silent step. In the corners of taverns, his name passed in low voices. Strider, the man who always walked alone but never fell. But Aragorn did not seek glory. He was chasing something deeper. He was chasing worth, because only by walking the long, brutal road of the forgotten could he ever hope to be the king the world had lost. Though Aragorn wandered far, the memory of Awan Uniel never left him. In the wild, where silence stretched endlessly and shadows hunted the unwary, her face returned to him like a dream he couldn't wake from. He thought often of her smile beneath Rivendell's starlit canopy, of the way her gaze steadied his soul. But love for Aragorn was not simple. It was a burden, one more impossible choice stacked upon the Blassans, ones already haunting his bloodline. Unknown to him, Owen too carried the weight of their bond. Elrond saw it in her silence, in the way she no longer smiled freely, in how she began to drift through Rivendell like a figure from another age, caught between immortality and the love of a mortal man. Her heart had been claimed, and with that came a terrible price. Elrond did not oppose Aragorn out of pride or prejudice. He feared for his daughter. He had seen the decay of mortal kingdoms, the fall of men, and the brief flicker of human life. To him, Aragorn was good and noble, yes, but doomed to die. There is sorrow enough in this world, Elrond told her. Do not add to it by choosing grief. But Arwen's heart was already decided. She returned to Lothlorien, where time moved slower, to reflect under the golden mal trees. There she spoke with her grandmother, Galadriel, who saw into the heart of all things. It was in that sacred place that Arwen finally made her decision. She would give up the immortal life of the Eldar. She would not sail west to the undying lands. she would stay for Aragon. Her choice was quiet, resolute, and irreversible. It was not a decision of impulse or fantasy, but of understanding. She knew she would know loss, that she would watch him age and die, that one day she would walk alone, and still she chose love, a love that spanned races, ages, and the bitter line between death and eternity. While Aragorn wandered, testing his body and spirit in war, Arwen had already passed her greatest trial. She had given up forever for a single lifetime beside him. Aragorn wandered for decades. He did not return to Rivendell. He could not. The memory of Arwen and the weight of his destiny made staying unbearable, and so he threw himself deeper into the Rime wilderness, into the forgotten edges of the world, where kings were myths and duty had no witnesses. But Aragorn was not running. He was preparing. Under various names and disguises, he served kings and lords without revealing his identity. In Rohan, he rode under King Tangle, Theoden's father, fighting often, lending raids, and proving himself a warrior of unmatched resolve. They knew him only as Thorin, Eagle of the Star, a name that hinted at nobility but revealed nothing. Years later, he served in Gondor beneath Stuart Esilian, the father of Denito. He wore no crown, but his command was respected like one. He advised in council, rode at the head of armies, and even led a daring assault against the corsairs of Umbar, setting their fleet ablaze. The people cheered his victory, then watched him vanish into the night. He did not stay for glory. He never did. Denethor, proud and suspicious, grew uneasy with this stranger who seemed to know too much and commanded too well. And Aragorn, sensing danger, slipped back into the wild. But his legend lingered. In both Rohan and Gondor, songs were whispered of a captain with grey eyes and a forgotten name, one who came in silence and left only victory behind. But while men spoke of Thorongil in hushed admiration, Aragorn found no rest. His travels carried him to the far south, into Harat, where stars were strange and enemies unending. He fought, bled, and watched the cruelty of Sauron's long arm stretch even into those distant lands. He began to understand the world not just through the lens of power, but through its pain. He saw what war did to the weak, what fear did to the good, and why kingship, if ever it came to him, must be more than a title. It must be a service. He returned to the north, older, leaner, hardened not just by sword, but by sorrow, and in his silence, in the dirt, beneath his boots, a king was quietly rising, one step at a time. By the time Aragorn returned to the north, the Six with Three, whispers of Sauron's return were no longer rumors. They were warnings. The Colleton of Send shadow had begun to stretch over Middle-earth, and Gandalf the Grey was already searching for answers in the dark. One of those answers had a name, Gollum, the twisted creature who once held the One Ring had vanished, and with him all certainty vanished too. If Sauron found him first, the world could fall before it even had a chance to fight. So, Gandalf turned to the one man he trusted most. He turned to Aragorn, and without question Aragorn accepted. Thus began a mission that would go unnoticed in the songs of men and the records of kings, but it may have saved all of Middle-earth. For years Aragorn hunted Gollum, not for glory, not for vengeance, but for knowledge. Every clue was a ghost. Every step led deeper into danger. From the marshes of the Anduin to the jagged peaks near Mordor, he followed the trail of the creature that once called the Ring precious. Tracking Gollum was unlike any hunt he had ever known. Gollum was clever, slippery, and desperate. He moved through places no sane man would go, feeding on filth, hiding in shadows, whispering madness into the night. But Aragorn did not stop. He braved places where the air-rire of death faced beasts that knew no fear of men. He endured loneliness deeper than wilderness itself. And finally, after what felt like an age, he found Gollum, wretched, pale, half-mad, yet alive. Aragorn captured him near the dead marshes, not far from Mordor's grasp. He bound the creature and brought him north, through dangerous lands, never resting for long. Knowing the Eye was searching, he delivered Gollum to the wood elves of Mirkwood, where he would be kept safely. For now, what Aragorn didn't realize was that in capturing Gollum, he had unknowingly protected Frodo's path before it had even begun. Had Gollum roamed free, the ring's journey to Mount Doom may have ended before it ever started. There was no crown, no song, no reward for this, only silence. But Aragorn didn't need songs. He only needed to know he had done his part. The shadows were lengthening across Middle-earth. Gandalf had uncovered the truth. The One Ring had been found, and it was in the hands of a gentle hobbit from the Shire, Frodo Baggins, nephew of the very Bilbo who had once stumbled upon it in the darkness of Gollum's cave. Now, Sauron knew the rings were riding. Time was gone. But Gandalf was delayed, and Frodo was walking blind into danger. So, once again, the task fell to Aragorn. He rode for the village of Bree, a quiet, unassuming place where few paid attention to the large occurrence of the world. He entered the prancing pony, hooded and silent, watching the door. When Frodo finally arrived, it wasn't under cover of secrecy. A clumsy accident caused the ring to slip onto his finger, and in a flash he vanished. The room froze. Eyes turned, whispers stirred, and Aragorn knew the enemy had seen him. That night, in the shadows of a smoky inn, Strider revealed himself, not as a king, not as a hero, but as a man who had been watching Frodo for far longer than the hobbit realized. "I can protect you," he said, eyes piercing through the dark, "but I cannot guarantee your safety if you refuse to trust me." Frodo hesitated. Who was this grim, weathered man in the corner? Friend, spy, assassin? But Aragorn didn't offer assurances. He offered truth. His voice carried weight, not of command, but of exhaustion. He had walked too far, seen too much, and lost too many to waste time with lies. And slowly trust was born. When The rings attacked later that night. Aragorn did not run. He fought them off, with fire and steel, defending the hobbits with a fury that shocked even himself. These were no longer mere travelers. They were charges, and their survival was now tied to his fate. From Bree, Aragorn would lead them on the pry, hidden paths through the wild, not just as a guide, but as a guardian. No longer Dorangiu, no longer Istel. Now he was Strider, the ranger with the broken sword and the unbroken will. And with that first step out of Bree, the road to destiny truly began. Leaving Bree, Aragorn had no illusions about the road. Two ahead, the Nine were hunting. The ring was drawing evil like blood draws, wolves, and Frodo, whether he knew it or not, carried more than the fate of his kind. He carried the fate of the world. Aragorn led the hobbits eastward, avoiding roads, steering clear of open land, and trusting only the trees and hills he'd wandered for decades. His pace was relentless. His eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. He didn't eat much. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was only to warn. If the black riders find us in the open, we will not survive. Through the Midgewater marshes, they slogged, soaked, and bitten by endless swarms of insects. Days bled into nights. The hobbits began to question whether this grim man was truly their protector, or just another shadow to be feared. But at Weathertop their doubts vanished. The group made camp among the crumbling ruins of an old Arnorian watchtower, but the shadows crept closer, and that night 5 ring wraiths descended in black silence, blades drawn and wailing. Aragorn fought them with torch and sword, flame and fury, holding the line while the others scrambled to protect Frodo. But it wasn't enough. Frodo was stabbed by a Morgul blade, a wound not meant to kill, but to enslave. The shard began to move toward his heart. Aragorn knew what it meant. If Frodo didn't reach Rindal soon, he would become a wraith himself, another servant of Sauron. The ranger became desperate. He led them through hills and rivers across dangerous ground, never sleeping. When Frodo faltered, Aragorn carried him. When the others despaired, he gave them firelight. And just when it seemed too late, salvation came in the form of Arwen. She rode like the wind, faster than any blade could follow. With Frodo in her arms, she summoned the power of the river itself to wash away the black riders. Aragorn watched her from the bank, his love, his hope, his reminder of why he fought. And finally, battered, bloodied, and breathless, they arrived at Rivendell. Frodo lived, but Aragorn knew this was only the beginning. The darkness had tasted them, and it would not stop hunting. The halls of Rivendell had not seen such tension in many ages. Elves, dwarves, men, and hobbits sat beneath the ancient arches of Elrond's house, gathered not in celebration but in crisis. The One Ring had been revealed, and with it the truth that no kingdom could ignore. Sauron had returned. Aragorn stood at the edge of the council, cloaked in quiet dignity. He said little as the others debated, argued, and fell into old rivalries. But when Boromir of Gondor questioned his authority, questioned his bloodline. Aragorn stepped forward, not with pride, but with purpose. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can protect you, I will. The words were not loud, but they landed like steel. The broken sword of Elendil Narsil had been reforged. Its name now was Anduril, Flame of the West. It gleamed with the fire of a legacy reborn. Elrond confirmed what few in the Packenders council suspected. This ranger in travel-worn boots was no ordinary man. He was Ildildor's heir, the rightful king of Gondor and Aenor. And though Aragorn flinched at the weight of that title, he did not refuse it. When the time came to choose who would carry the ring toward Mount Doom, it was clear Frodo would go, but he would not go alone. Elves, dwarves, men, and hobbits would stand beside him. The Fellowship of the Ring was born. Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir, Gandalf, and Aragorn. It was not a band of heroes. It was a fragile alliance full of old grudges, clashing ideals, and unspoken fears. But Aragorn knew that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged, not in kinship, but in shared purpose. He walked beside Legolas, an elf, Gimli, a dwarf, and Boromir, a man of Gondor, who still doubted him, and yet he accepted them all. He looked after Frodo like a guardian, gave Sam quiet nods of reassurance, and watched Gandalf not as a follower, but as an equal in burden. As they left Rivendell and crossed into the wild, Aragorn did not wear a crown, but among those 9 he walked like a king, not by bloodline alone, but by choice. Snow choked the mountain passes, and wolves howled in the night. Caradhras had turned them back with a fury that felt unnatural. The Fellowship had only one path left: Moria, the long-abandoned kingdom beneath the misty mountains. Aragorn hesitated. He knew the name well. Khazad-dûm, once the pride of the dwarves, was now whispered as a tomb. Orcs had swarmed it, and darker things were said to dwell in its depths. He looked to Gandalf, his old friend, and trusted his judgment, though his heart was heavy. As the great doors creaked open, darkness swallowed them whole. Inside, the air was still and stale, thick with the weight of death. The Fellowship moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing off cold stone. Gimli walked with pride, eager to see his kin's holes. But when they found Balin's tomb silent and desecrated, even Gimli wept. And then came the drums. "They are coming," Aragorn whispered, his hand tightening on Anduril. The orcs struck like a wave in the darkness, hundreds of them, swarming the Fellowship in the tomb chamber. Aragorn fought with cold precision, blade flashing in the dark. He defended Frodo with everything he had, striking down foe after foe, shoulder to shoulder with Boromir. But then something deeper stirred, a sound like thunder, a shadow with fire for limbs, the Balrog of Morgoth. Even Aragorn, a man who had faced monsters and armies, felt fear crawl down his spine. This was no orc. This was ancient, older than the kingdoms of men. The Fellowship fled across the crumbling bridge of Khazad-dûm. Aragorn turned back, only to see Gandalf stand against the beast alone. you shall not pass. The barack fell, dragging Gandalf with it. Silence, horror, grief. Aragorn did not have time to mourn. As the fellowship stumbled out of the east gate into the sunlight, broken and breathless, they looked to him, not as a guide anymore, but as a leader, and he stepped forward, voice firm despite the pain. We must move. Gandalf's sacrifice will be for nothing if we linger. In that moment, Aragorn changed. He was no longer just the watchful ranger. He was now the fellowship's compass and its spine. After the terror of Moria, the fellowship emerged into sunlight, but not into peace. Gandalf was gone. The wizard who had guided them from the Shire, who stood against shadow and flame, had fallen. The silence among them was heavy. Frodo walked in a daze. Sam clenched his jaw to keep from breaking. Even Legolas lowered his gaze. But Aragorn could not grieve, not yet. He led them southward through the trees of Lothlorien, the Golden Wood, where time itself seemed to slow. It was said that no evil could enter those borders, that the trees themselves whispered secrets older than stone. Here, at last, the fellowship found rest. But for Aragorn it was more than rest. It was memory, for in this ancient forest lived Galadriel, Lady of Light and grandmother to Arwen. Aragorn stood before her not as a ranger, but as a man who carried both love and legacy in his heart. Galadriel looked into him, not with judgment, but with understanding. She saw the boy raised in secret, the man burdened by fate, the heart still tethered to her granddaughter. She has chosen, Galadriel said gently. The path of the even star is now bound to yours. Aragorn said nothing. He didn't need to. He had carried that knowledge like a hidden flame for years now. It flickered brighter, both a comfort and a curse, while others in the fellowship received gifts from the lady. Aragorn's gift was not given with fanfare. It was a simple sheath for his reforged sword, Anduril, and a look that pierced time. You are Isildur's heir, she said, not because of your blood, but because you endure. In the quiet woods of Lothlorien, Aragorn remembered who he was fighting for. Not just Middle-earth, not just Gondor, but for the chance that love could survive in a world drowning in war. He walked among the golden trees, thinking of Arwen's choice, the price she had already paid, the life she had given up for a future still uncertain. He vowed to be worthy of that sacrifice. The fellowship would soon leave Lothlorien and head deeper into danger. But for one moment, Aragorn stood still, beneath golden leaves and eternal starlight, where time did not matter and hope still breathed. The fellowship left Lothlorien with new gifts, rested limbs, and heavy hearts. Each boat glided silently down the river Anduin, the golden wood fading behind them. Ahead lay uncertainty. Mordor to the east, Gondor to the west, and danger in every direction. And within their company the first cracks began to form. Boromir grew restless. The son of the steward of Gondor, noble and brave, began to speak of the ring not as a burden but as a weapon, a gift, a tool that could save his people. Aragon saw the change. He saw the hunger building in Boromir's eyes, the way he looked at Frodo when he thought no one noticed. And still, Aragorn said nothing. Perhaps part of him hoped it was just fear. Perhaps part of him feared saying it aloud would make it real. But deep down he knew the ring was beginning to work its poison at Ammonhen, the hill of seeing the Fellowship's fragile unity finally shattered. Boromir confronted Frodo, demanding the ring, not in anger, but in desperation. He saw Minas burning in his dreams. He saw his people dying, and he thought, this is the only way. Frodo fled. The moment Boromir realized what he'd done, it was already too late. The Fellowship was broken. Frodo disappeared, determined to continue the journey alone. Sam, loyal beyond measure, followed, and in the chaos, orcs attacked, swarming from the woods with blades and howls. Boromir fought like a lion to defend Merry, and Pippin, slaying dozens before falling too. Arrow after arrow, Aragorn arrived too late to save him. But in those final moments, Boromir saw the man he had doubted. I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king. He whispered, blood on his lips. Aragorn wept, but there was no time to mourn. Merry and Pippin had been taken. Frodo was gone. The Fellowship was scattered, standing in the forest, wind cold against his face. Aragorn had to make a choice. Chase Frodo into Mordor, or save the others. He chose both. He turned to Legolas and Gimli, eyes sharp, with purpose. Let us hunt some orc. He wasn't a king yet, but he had made a king's decision. The forest behind him still echoed with death. But Aragorn had no time to grieve. Merry and Pippin had been taken, carried off by Uruk-hai, foul creatures bred for war, faster than orcs, stronger than men. Time was running out. Every hour meant more distance between the Fellowship and the two hobbits. So Aragorn ran, with Legal at his side, light-footed and keen-eyed, and Gimli, stout and tireless. They pursued the orcs day and night. No rest, no hesitation, only tracks in the grass, and smoke on the wind. For days they pushed through the plains of Rohan, a sea of green, stretching endlessly in all directions. The sun beat down, the wind burned, but Aragorn did not slow. He tracked with terrifying precision, pausing to feel footprints, smell broken twigs, notice where the orcs had dragged their prisoners. He read the land like a two-story, and the story was one of brutality. Yet, even in that urgency, Aragorn showed something more than survival instinct. He showed command. When Aoma, captain of the Rohirrim, intercepted them, swords were nearly drawn. The riders of Rohan had killed the orc band the night before, but had seen no hobbits among the dead. To them, Aragorn's story sounded like madness. Halflings, a wizard fallen, a ranger chasing shadows. But Aragorn stepped forward, unbarred. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn. If by life or death I can save them, I will. There was still in his voice, not arrogance, but authority, the kind that can't be taught, only forged through fire and failure. Aoma, sensing the Creasin from truth in him, gave them horses, and so the chase continued. They rode harder than ever, pushing their mounts to the brink, and when they reached the battlefield where the orcs had fallen, Aragorn searched the remains with desperate hands. No hobbit bodies, no sign of Frodo. But the clues were there: small footprints, broken ropes, signs of escape. "They're alive," Aragorn breathed. It was a whisper, but it hit like thunder. For the first time since the fellowship broke, hope sparked again in his chest. The path ahead was still dangerous, but he would follow it until the very end. The trail led Aragorn and his companions into the heart of Rohan, a land of open plains, windswept hills, and horse lords, proud and fierce. It also led them into a kingdom under siege, not from without, but from within. When they arrived at Edaris, the capital of Rohan, they found its king, Theoden, a shadow of what he once was. His throne was draped in silence, his eyes dulled by darkness. A pale figure named Grima. Wormong whispered at his side like a serpent in silk, but Aragorn saw through it all immediately. This was no simple court intrigue. This was Saruman's poison, working through deception and despair. Theoden's kingdom was rotting from within while orcs marched at its borders. Before the king could even lift his eyes, Aragorn's sword was nearly taken at the door. "You would not part a ranger from his blade," he warned, holding Anduril, the flame-forged heirloom of kings, tight in his hand. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked into the Golden Hall, not as a beggar, not as a wanderer, but as a man whose time had come to stand tall. It was Gandalf, returned from death as Gandalf the White, who broke Wormtong's hold and awakened Theoden from his stupor. But it was Aragorn who stood beside him, silent and strong as the old king. Reclaimed his voice. He didn't issue commands. He didn't shout. He simply stood there, tall, steady, kingly in everything but name. When Theoden decided to ride out against the encroaching forces of Saruman, Aragorn chose to ride with him. Not for duty, not for glory, but because the people of Rohan were in danger. And Aragorn had made a vow long ago not to abandon the world to shadow. Still, doubts lingered among the Rohirrim. Who was this ranger? From the north? Could he be trusted? Was he a threat to their kingdom? And yet, as he moved through their ranks, as he spoke with warriors and farmers alike, something shifted. They began to believe, not because of his sword, but because of his presence. The king of Gondor had not yet taken his throne, but the people were already beginning to feel him rise. The storm was coming. Saruman had unleashed his army. 10,000 Uruk high-bred for war, bound for Helms. Deep, the ancient stronghold of Rohan. It was a fortress carved into stone, a last refuge for the people. But it was no match for a force that large. Not without hope, not without unity. As the skies darkened, Aragorn stood beside King Theoden, preparing for battle. The walls were lined with farmers, boys too young to shave, old men too tired to run. Most had never held a sword, but Aragorn had. He moved through them not as a commander, shouting orders, but as a brother in arms. He adjusted helmets, sharpened blades, spoke softly to those trembling behind their shields. He didn't lie to them. There is no dawn for us unless we fight. Even Theoden, hardened by grief and bitterness, struggled to believe they had any chance. But Aragorn never flinched, not because he lacked fear, but because he had learned how to carry it. When the horns of war sounded and the Uruks marched through the rain, Aragorn was first to the front line, sword raised. He fought like a man, possessed, not for glory, not for kingship, but for every soul huddled in the caves behind the walls. Side by side, with Legolas and Gimli, he held the line, as long as mortal hands could. He bled, he stumbled, he rose again. Arrow after arrow fell, the gates buckled, the walls shattered, and still he fought. But even he knew it wouldn't be enough. Then, as night gave way to the Pokabet, thinnest edge of dawn, a horn sounded in the distance. Gandalf had returned. With him rode Eomer and the riders of Rohan, sweeping down the hill like a wave of light against darkness. The tide turned, the enemy broke, and the day against all odds was won. In the aftermath, the people of Rohan did not chant Theoden's name. They looked to Aragorn. He had no crown, no throne, but he had earned their hearts. The boy from Rivendell was gone. What remained was a leader, no longer hiding from destiny, but riding straight into it. Helm's Deep had been saved, but Aragorn knew the war was far from over. Victory had come with a cost, and with a question. What would Saruman do next? But when Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, and King Theoden rode to Enard, they found something they didn't expect. They found it in ruins. The once mighty tower of Orang stood intact, but the grounds around it had been reduced to rubble and twisted steel. The rivers had flooded it. Its forges were drowned. The Uruk-hai armies gone. And standing in the middle of it, all like children who'd broken a toy, too big to understand, were Merry and Pippin, the ants, ancient tree-like shepherds of the forest, had marched to war. Led by Treebeard, they had torn Saruman's war machine apart from its roots. No spell or flame could stop them. But for Aragorn, the victory was not just strategic, it was personal. He had mourned Merry and Pippin. He had chased their captives across hundreds of miles, now seeing them alive, safe, and laughing over barrels of stolen pipeweed. Something in him finally let go. The fellowship had not completely broken, not yet. And then came the reckoning. Gandalf confronted Saruman, who remained locked inside, bitter, proud, still poisoned by his belief in power. He had once been the leader of their order. Now he was a pawn of Sauron, or worse, his rival. Aragorn listened in silence as Saruman spat venom from his high perch. The wizard tried to bend Theoden's will, tried to shake Aragorn's confidence, but there was no fear left in the Rares' eyes, only resolve. Saruman's staff shattered. His power was broken, but still, Aragorn felt it. This was not the end. This was only a distraction. Sauron was moving in Mordor. The Eye was awake, and the ring was still out there, somewhere beyond the veil of fire and ash. Aragorn stood at the edge of the ruin, staring eastward. Victory over. Saruman had given them breathing room, but breathing room wasn't survival. The war is not over, he said, and in his voice, for the first time, there was something that even kings feared: urgency. The tide of war was rising, fast. Sauron had unleashed his armies. Gondor stood on the brink of siege, and, though the victory at Helm's Deep had given hope, Aragorn knew hope alone would not win this war. They needed something more. That's when Elrond's sons came to him, bearing a message from their father and a sword. Andril, reforged from the shards of Narsil, had already tasted battle, but now Eland had delivered another inheritance. Take the dim Holt road, the message read. The dead do not suffer the living to pass, but you are Isildur's heir. It was a path few dared even whisper about, a haunted realm beneath the White Mountains, where an ancient curse lingered, an oath broken, a king dishonored, a people damned to shadow. But Aragorn understood what was being asked of him. He had to summon the dead, men of Dunharrow, ghosts of traitors who had once sworn loyalty to Isildur, then fled the field when the Dark Lord rose. In shame, they had been cursed to linger beyond death until their oath was fulfilled, and only Eildur's heir could call them. Aragorn did not flinch. He turned from Theoden's muster and led Legolas and Gimli to the mouth of the mountain. Cold wind, black stone, no moon. Even Gimli, fearless among orcs and trolls, trembled, but Aragorn stepped forward into the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with silence. Whispers echoed with no speaker. Shadows flickered where no flame burned. And then they came, ghosts, pale, hollow-eyed, armed with weapons long, rusted in the real world. They circled him, voices like wind on bone. Who enters the domain of the dead? Aragorn raised Andúril. Its flame gleamed not with fire, but with truth. I am Isildur's heir. I summon you to fulfill your oath. The ghost hesitated. Centuries of shame held them back. But Aragorn did not waver. He looked them in the eye, not as a supplicant, but as a king, and they followed. From the moment, the fate of the war changed course. Aragorn had stepped into death and walked out with an army. The White City was burning. Minas Tirith, proud jewel of Gondor, stood under siege. The skies above it blackened with smoke, and winged beasts. Catapults roared, orcs flooded the Pelennor fields, and in the heart of the storm, Gondor stood alone. But help was coming, and with it a ghostly vengeance, while Theoden and the riders of Rohan charged into battle, breaking the orc ranks with thunder and blade. Aragorn took a darker road, sailing up the river Anduin. He came not with banners, but with silence. The ships of the corsairs of Umbar, allies of Sauron, blackened the horizon. Gondor's hope began to flicker until the sails dropped and Aragorn emerged, not alone. Behind him came the army of the dead, a tide of pale warriors, cursed spirits who had waited centuries for release at his command. They poured from the ships, sweeping over the battlefield like a storm of vengeance. No blade could stop them, no wall could hold them. They tore through the orcs like wind, through dry leaves. The tide turned. What had seemed like Gondor's final hour became its salvation. Aragon fought not from behind the lines, but in the thick of it he saw Andril blazing, cutting down foes with terrifying speed. To those who saw him, he looked like a figure from legend, tall, grim eyes, burning with purpose. He called men to rally. He lifted fallen warriors to their feet. He didn't order them forward, he led them. When the battle was done and the field lay covered in blood and ruin, Aragorn turned to the ghosts. Their oath was fulfilled, and with a single word he released them. Be at peace. The spirits faded like mist in sunlight, and with them the shadow of ancient shame. Gondor had been saved, but the war was far from over. In the Blains, this aftermath, men turned to Aragorn, not just as a warrior, but as something more, a symbol. The blood of kings flowed in his veins, but it was his choices, not his crown, that made them to follow him. For the first time, in the Brubling Dodder's eyes of Gondor, the king had returned. Gondor stood, but barely. The battle of Pelennor Fields had ended, yet Aragorn knew it was only a reprieve. The eye of Sauron was still fixed on Mordor's gates, searching, calculating, waiting. The ring was still out there, hidden, but not safe, and time was running out. Aragorn gathered the leaders of the free peoples, Gandalf, Aoma, Imrail, and others. He offered a plan so bold it bordered on madness. They would march on the Black Gate, not to win, but to distract. The goal was simple: draw Sauron's eye away from Frodo. Give the ring-bearer the smallest chance to reach Mount Doom. It was a suicide mission, wrapped in strategy, and Aragorn never blinked. Let us draw his gaze, even if we cannot hold it, he said. We must give hope a chance. He marched with an army of 6,000 against Mordor's legions. It was a whisper in the wind. As they approached the Black Gate, the Morin, the land itself seemed to recoil. The sky turned red. The wind stank of sulphur and ash. Shadows moved with hunger. Still, Aragorn rode at the paladins in front. At the gates, they were met by the mouth of Sauron, a twisted herald with eyes like cold flame. He jeered, taunted, showed them Frodo's mythical coat and elven blade, claiming the ring bearer was captured. Aragorn said nothing. Then he drew his sword, and in one swift stroke he cut off the mouth's head. I do not believe you, he said. With that, the armies of Mordor poured forth tens of thousands, orcs, trolls, beasts of war, a black tide against a dyed stone of hope. But Aragorn stood firm, atop a hill of shattered stone, with death surrounding him. He turned to his men. Hold your ground, hold your ground. His voice rang like a bell of war and destiny. A day may come when the courage of men fails, but it is not this day. And with a cry he led the charge into death. into legend, not as a king seeking glory, but as a man giving everything so that two hobbits could finish what no one else could. The black gate exploded into chaos. Orcs and trolls clashed with the last army of the West. Screams echoed across the broken plains of Mordor. Steel met steel, and dust choked the skies. At the heart of it all, Aragorn fought like a man who had already accepted death, because he knew this battle wasn't about victory, it was about time. Time for Frodo. Aragorn cut through enemies with Anduril, his blades singing with every strike. Beside him, Gimli, Legolas, and Eomer stood fast, surrounded on all sides. The hill where they fought became a beacon, a defiance the enemy could not ignore. And then everything stopped. A tremor shook the earth. The sky cracked. From the distance, far across the ashen plains, came a roar like the end of the world. Mount Doom erupted. Flames soared into the sky. A tower crumbled in the distance. Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, the very seat of Sauron's power, the eye, once fixed on the battlefield, wavered, then screamed. A sound with no voice, no body, only will, and then silence. The ring had been destroyed by Frodo and by Gollum, in a twist even fate couldn't predict. In that moment, the armies of Mordor crumbled, trolls staggered, orcs fled in panic. Some simply fell to their knees, undone by the power that had held them together. The darkness peeled away like smoke and wind. Aragorn stood, breathless, covered in ash and blood, but alive. He looked to the east, toward the ruined mountain, and whispered not a cheer, but a prayer. They had done it. Middle-earth was free, but victory didn't feel like glory. It felt like quiet and grief. Boromir, Theoden, countless others had fallen for this moment. And Frodo, Sam, where were they now? Gandalf soon brought the answer. From the fires of Mordor, the hobbits were alive, broken, burned, but alive. And Aragorn the ranger, who had once walked alone through shadow, knelt beside them, not as a king, not as a warrior, but as a friend. You bow to no one, he told them. And he meant it. The war was over. But Aragorn's greatest test was still to come. The war was over. Sauron had fallen. The ring was gone. Peace, for the first time in an age, had returned to Middle-earth. And now the crownless would be crowned. The white city of Minas Tirith, battered but still standing, opened its gates to receive its king. The people lined the streets, silent at first. Then, as the procession approached, they began to cheer. But it was not just a celebration, it was a reckoning. For too long, the line of kings had been broken. Gondor had endured under stewards, faithful but not destined. The blood of Isildur, once a curse, was now their salvation. Aragorn walked through the city, not draped in gold, not surrounded by banners, but with quiet reverence. Behind him came Gandalf, Faramir, Eomer, and others who had seen what he truly was, not just a warrior, but a leader, shaped by fire and humility. At the steps of the citadel, Gandalf held the ancient crown of Gondor, silver and jeweled, glinting in the morning sun. But Aragorn paused. He turned to the man who had resisted him, fought beside him, and nearly died for him. Famir, son of Denethor, the last steward. Shall he be king and enter into the Brody city? Gandalf asked. Famir knelt. The hands of the king are the hands of a healer. Thus shall the rightful king be known. Aragorn took the crown and bowed, his head not in pride, but in service. Gandalf placed it upon him. Elsa, Telkont, the elf stone, the king had returned. Cheers erupted from the walls, rising like a wave that swept the city. But Aragorn didn't raise his arms. He didn't shout. Instead, he sang in Elvish, the tongue of the firstborn. He sang of peace, of sorrow, and of a new age, rising from the ruins of the old. This was not a conqueror's victory. It was a promise. Later, he would walk among the people, heal the wounded with his hands, and speak to every soul, not as ruler, but as guardian. The throne of Gondor had been empty for generations, but now it held a king not forged in luxury, but in sacrifice. He had worn the crown, he had reclaimed the throne, but there was still one piece of Aragorn's destiny left unfinished. Arwen. 4 years she had been the silent star in his sky, the love he carried through every trial, every mile, every moment of doubt. She had made her choice long ago, beneath the golden trees of Lorien, giving up immortality for a life that would burn bright and end in time. Now, with Sauron defeated and peace restored, the road that had separated them finally ended. She came to Mina, Tith with the elves of Rivendell, riding in quiet grace. The people watched in awe, for Arwen Uniel was no ordinary bride. She was the daughter of Eland, granddaughter of Galadriel, the even star of her people, a being of near mythical beauty, now stepping into the world of men for one man alone. When Aragorn saw her, the weight of years fell from him. He did not rush to her. He did not weep. He simply held her eyes, because no words were left to say. They were wed in the City of Kings, beneath the white tree, with the stars above, and the world reborn around them. The ceremony was quiet. Elves sang songs, older than stone. Gondrans wept. Even the hobbits smiled in silence, understanding that they were witnessing something greater than politics or power. This was love earned. Aragorn held Arwen's hands, and with her he wasn't the king of Gondor. He was simply the boy from Rivendell, the ranger who walked in shadow, the man who endured not for a crown, but for the chance to stand beside her. Their wedding did more than bind two hearts. It united the blank things, realms of men and elves, bridging the two worlds for the last time before the elves sailed west. Eland, Arwen's father, watched with quiet sorrow, but even he at last saw what his daughter had chosen, not just mortality, but meaning. From that day on, Arwen became queen of the reunited kingdom, and Aragorn, once called Estel Hope, now lived not just as a king, but as the man who had made hope real. Aragorn ruled wisely and long, Under his reign, Gondor and Anor were reunited. Peace spread across the lands that had once been torn by shadow. The white tree bloomed again. Roads were rebuilt, old alliances restored. The age of men truly began, and it was Aragon Elsar, the elf stone, who guided it into light. But even kings cannot escape time. Unlike Arwen, Aragorn had always known his life would be brief by elven standards. The blood of Newmore gave him long years, more than most men. But mortality still waited at the edge of every sunrise. He did not fear it. He had faced worse. In the 120th year of the Fourth Age, Aragorn felt the weight of years grow heavy. His hair silvered, his steps slowed, but his mind remained sharp, his heart steady. He looked upon his son, elder, heir to the throne, and knew it was time. Unlike those who clung to power, Aragorn chose the path of the ancient kings of Numa. He would relinquish life willingly before weakness and weariness could claim him. It was not an act of surrender, but of grace, a final gift to the world he had protected. He summoned Arwen to his side. She had given up immortality for him, and now she would watch him leave. The sorrow in her eyes could not be measured, but there was no bitterness, only love and a pain too deep for words. This is the gift of men, Aragorn told her gently, to leave when the work is done. He lay in the House of Kings, robed in white, his sword across his chest. He looked at Arwen and whispered his final words. In sorrow we must go, but not in despair. Then with peace endures. His heart, he willed himself to die, not with fear, but with dignity. Middle earth did not tremble. No armies clashed, no horns blew. It was a quiet passing for the greatest king of the age. Aragorn left behind a kingdom renewed, a son ready, and a legacy that would outlive stone and song. He was born in exile, he died in peace, and he lived as legend. He was gone. Aragorn, king, lover, the man Owen had chosen over eternity, had passed beyond the circles of the world, and with him her light dimmed. In the silence that followed his death, Arwen Untwyl, queen of the reunited kingdom, said nothing. She simply faded. She had given up her immortality for one lifetime with him. That lifetime had now run its course. There would be no ship to Valinor, no healing in the west, no second dawn. The daughter of Eland, born in starlight, now stood alone among the mortal world. She had embraced. She gave her son Eldarion her blessing, quietly with a mother's strength. And then she turned away from Minas, from the court, the crown, the white tree, and all the echoes of their life. Together, she journeyed alone to Lorien, the golden wood, where their love had once blossomed beneath the Maloran trees. But the forest was empty. Now, the elves had sailed, the song had ended, the leaves had fallen, only silence remained. There, among the roots of forgotten beauty, she laid herself upon the mossy hill of Serin Amroth, the very place where Aragorn had first spoken his heart long ago, where she had chosen mortality, not knowing what pain it would bring. She wore no crown, no jewels, only memory, and there she died. No grand ceremony, no weeping crowds, only the wind through golden leaves, whispering her name, Arwen. She was the last echo of the elves in Middle-earth, and her passing marked the final end of an age. Yet her love endures not in the Reen's pains, the pages of history, but in the hearts of those who remember what it means to choose love over fear, sacrifice over comfort, mortality over forever. She and Aragorn became more than legend. They became the bridge between worlds, the end of the firstborn, and the dawn of the race of men. The days of the elves had ended, the ring was gone, the shadow of Sauron broken, and now Aragorn was gone too. Arwen's light had faded, the fellowship had parted. The last great tales of the Third Age were now memories, sung in halls and whispered by firelight. But Aragorn's legacy lived on, not in monuments or marble, but in the hearts of those who had followed him. His son, Eldarion, took the throne. He ruled with the same steady wisdom, the same quiet strength. The kingdoms of Gondor and Aenor remained united under the reunited kingdom, a symbol of hope made real. Across the lands, the name LSR became more than a title. It became a reminder that greatness is not born. It's forged in pain, sacrifice, love, and purpose. In the north, the Dunedain still kept watch over the wild places, guided by the memory of the ranger who became a king. In Rohan they told stories of the man who fought beside their riders, uniting kingdoms through honor. In the Shire, 4 hobbits remembered a tall man with grey eyes and a soft voice who called them heroes when the world didn't know their names. And in elven song, what few remained, Aragorn was sung not as a warrior, but as Estelle, hope, the one who walked in shadow and chose the light, the one who stood not for himself, but for others. His story was not perfect. He doubted, he fell, he bled. But in every choice he made, he pushed back against the darkness, not with power, but with principle, and perhaps that's what made him worthy of the crown. Not that he claimed it, but that he never needed it to lead. Now his sword, Anduril, rests in the halls of kings, the white tree still blooms, and the world he helped save moves on, quietly, peacefully, but sometimes when the wind brushes the stones of Minster, just right. It said you can still hear his voice. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and I have kept no hope for myself. And so the tale ends, not with a war cry, but with the silence of a world rebuilt and the echo of a man who became legend forever.